When you think of the strongest types in Pokemon, Dragon is probably one of the first that comes to mind. As a type, Dragon has great defense and even better offense, varied and powerful move pools, and some of the all-around best stat spreads in the entire game. And when it comes to challenge runs, Dragon-type specialists are often some of the main hurdles you'll have to clear to earn a victory. There are a lot of cases where, if you don't manage to secure a strong Ice-type to counter them, you're simply straight out of luck. So that's why today I wanted to make a Dragon-type trainer the next focus of my BQ Challenge series. And this time, I've chosen Clair. Clair is a young, promising gym leader with big dreams and the confidence to make them a reality. And I'm sure many of us either have or have heard horror stories about her ability to stop a Johto Nuzlocke dead in its tracks. She's strong as is, with a Gyarados, 2 Dragonairs, and her ace Kingdra. But she adds on to the difficulty with devious uses of moves like Smokescreen, Hyper Beam, and Hydro Pump, the latter of which are made even scarier with her high critical hit sniper ability. My friends and I have lost to Clair multiple times throughout our runs, which is why I've decided to put her to the test and try to solo her with every single Pokemon in the Johto Regional Pokedex, in an attempt to see just how strong she really is. This is the third entry in my BQ ranking series, and follows our last challenge run against Sydney of Hoenn's Elite Four. I'm excited to get into the video, so let's get it started. First up are the rules, which I'll cover briefly now. The main goal of this challenge is to fight Clair with each Pokemon in the HeartGold SoulSilver Regional Pokedex one by one, and once we're done, we'll compare the number of Pokemon that could solo her with the total number of Pokemon used to get our BQ, a rough measure of her strength or weakness as a trainer. As for what we can do to our Pokemon to do this, almost anything goes. EVs and IVs can be maxed out, TMs can be used, and held items are totally fine. However, we will be banning the use of non-held items, one-hit KO moves, Attract, as well as evasion-altering moves such as Double Team and Smokescreen. Up to now, I've also been banning the use of Hidden Power, but because I've instituted a change in how we calculate our level cap, for now I'm going to unban that move and allow us to use it as a test just to see what we'll do in the future. I also want to mention here that for this video, I'll be instituting an attempt limit. Previously, I gave myself as many attempts as my patience allowed to get the victory, but ultimately this isn't great for measuring an opponent's strengths or weaknesses. After all, in a world where critical hits exist, getting a victory can sometimes feel like waiting for a group of monkeys to finish up their Shakespeare fanfiction. So this time around, I'll be limiting myself to 20 attempts per unique loadout on a Pokemon, which means that if I hit 20 attempts and haven't won the fight, I either need to switch some moves, items, EVs, etc. around and start another round of 20, or call that Pokemon a failure and move on. This will be the biggest change aside from how we determine level cap, but I think it's for the best. And speaking of the level cap, let's talk about my system. Against Sydney and Bruno, I went with a straight 2 times level cap, but that turned out to be pretty overtuned, and so I'm going to test a new system out today. Although there were a lot of creative and unique suggestions in the comments, I think simplicity is just as important as difficulty, which is why I'll be taking this approach. Rather than a flat level modified for every fight, I want to attempt using a sliding scale based on our opponent's team size and their ace Pokemon's level. If our opponent has 1 Pokemon on their team, we'll go in with a straight modifier of 1 times, meaning our levels will be equal. And from there, we'll add 0.1 to the modifier for every extra Pokemon on their team. So, for example, if our opponent has 2 Pokemon, we would times the level of their ace by 1.1 to get our level cap. And if they have a full team of 6, we'll max out with a level cap of 1.5 times their ace's level. Clair, with 4 members on her team, will then give us a 1.3 times modified level cap, which means we'll be tackling this challenge with all of our Pokemon at level 53. I think that this is going to be both simpler and better for the challenge in the long run, but please watch the video and let me know what you think in the comments. I also want to take this moment to mention that I'll be putting who we face in the next BQ video up to a vote, so if you want to get involved in that, be sure to stick around until the end of the video. But that should be about it for the rules, which means it's finally time for us to ruin Clair's life. Let's get started. As usual, I'll be looking at this type by type, and first up is going to be water. In the Pokephenomenal house, we like to say that the best ice type is a water type with Ice Beam, and this would generally hold true against a Dragon Trainer. However, Claire made the smart call and included a terrifying water dragon on her team. Oh, and she also has a Gyarados. This means that on half of her team, ice damage will be hitting for neutral instead of super effective damage. Luckily for us, since I'm allowing hidden power for this run, we can just give most of our water types hidden power dragon and let their comparatively high special attack stat do the rest. Of course, this doesn't solve the problem of Gyarados, who, because he was excommunicated from the Dragon Council, isn't weak to Dragon-type moves. But Claire has thankfully given him a pretty poor moveset, and with the leftovers on the majority of our water types, we can take him out before sweeping her dragons. Using Hidden Power, I'm able to get a win with the Wooper, Goldeen, Slowpoke, Psyduck, Staryu, Shelder, Remoraid, Chinchou, Seal, and Squirtle lines, as well as with Vaporeon and Suicune. There are also quite a few water types that don't excel in using special attack, but that's okay. In place of learning how to use magic, they learned how to dance. Using moves like Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, and Belly Drum to boost our physical attackers before sweeping her team with a physical move, we're also able to secure relatively painless victories with the Totodile, Poliwag, Marill, Tentacool, Krabby, and Horsey lines, along with Gyarados. And then it was just a matter of picking up our few stray victories. A combination of Calm Mind and Ice Beam got us the win on Corsola, and a cheeky Mirror Coat with Mantine against her largely special attacking team got us the win there. Lapras, with access to Shockwave and Dragon Pulse, tore through her team in an instant, and even the lowly Quillfish was able to rely on a defense boost from Stockpile before mowing slowly over her team with Hidden Power. But, of course, even with all those victories, the water type isn't completely done. We still have to check in with our buddy Magikarp. In my previous videos, it actually wasn't that difficult to get victories with Magikarp due to the level disparity, but this time around things aren't so simple. Although Magikarp has finally hit the gym and learned how to use a new move with Bounce, when Clair essentially opens up with its dad, we don't stand much of a chance. I did give it the 20 attempts, but this time around it just wasn't happening. When all is said and done, we leave the water type having earned a respectable 45 out of 256 victories over Clair. After the water type, we'll take a look at fire, which I anticipated would be difficult. After all, Clair has two water types, one of her Dragonairs knows Aqua Tail, and to top all of that off, Dragon resists fire. Because of this fact, it was obvious to me early on that I would have to rely on some less than savory strategies if we were to get the win. And so I loaded up my Pokemon with Confusion and sleep-inducing moves, hoping that this would buy us enough time to finish off the Gyarados and let Hidden Power handle the rest. Sleep is an incredibly powerful tool in Pokemon, and our weakness to water didn't mean much when we were able to inflict narcolepsy on our opponents before they could do anything to us. Using some kind of combination of sleep, hidden power, and occasionally flamethrower, we picked up victories with the Vulpix, Ponyta, and Slugma lines, and also finished her off with Flareon. For the rest of the fire types that couldn't put her Pokemon to sleep, however, I had to rely on Confusion, which is a bit more of a risky method of supporting a victory. Although there are a few Pokemon in the fire type that can learn Confuse Ray and take advantage of its 100% accuracy with no drawbacks, most of them were forced to rely on Swagger, which has a few more negatives. While this move can be learned by most Pokemon in the game, it has both a lower accuracy than Confuse Ray, and also increases the target's attack in order to balance it. This can be pretty risky in general, but for this fight in particular, it's actually not the worst call. Although the Gyarados is able to take advantage of the buffed attack, the rest of her Pokemon are almost always hitting for special damage, which will allow Swagger to become an important tool for us both in this type and beyond. Using some combination of Confusion, Hidden Power, and occasionally Toxic, we clawed our way to victory with the Cyndaquil, Growlithe, and Magby lines, although they were pretty scary. Both Cyndaquil and Magby got dangerously close to the 20 attempt limit before finally getting their victory, but they thankfully got there in the end. And finally, to round out the fire type, we got through the fight with the Charmander line via Dragon Dance and Dragon Claw, while relying on combinations of Calm Mind, Hidden Power, and Thunderbolt to earn quick victories with the legendaries Moltres, Entei, and Ho-Oh. These final three victories bring our total up to 65 out of 256, and lets us move on to the Grass type. Grass is a great type for a lot of reasons, but the most important to us right now are status moves. Pretty much every Grass-type Pokemon in this game can learn at least one out of the moves Sleep Powder, Leech Seed, and Ingrain, which are each powerful enough on their own to give almost any Pokemon a shot in battle. And if they're paired together, Well, let's just say that if I have to make a choice between facing off against 1980s Mike Tyson or a Hoppip with Sleep Powder Leech Seed, I'm picking Mike every day of the week. Using just Sleep Powder, Leech Seed, and an attacking move, we're able to get our wins with the Chikorita and Execute lines, as well as with Sunflora. And when we added either Growth or Swords Dance to the mix, we also managed to secure victories with the Bellsprout, Hoppip, Oddish, Tangela, and Bulbasaur groups. Unfortunately, however, there was one grass type who didn't make the cut. Sunkern, despite being a cute little guy, is what we in the industry call weak as hell. And even with a combination of Leech Seed, Ingrain, Protect, and Hidden Power Dragon, I wasn't able to get the victory within 20 attempts. I feel that this one should technically be possible, but because I'm not exactly sure what loadout would be better than the one I had, I'm going to chalk it up as the only failure for this type, which brings our total number of victories so far up to 86 out of 256. Up next is the Flying type, which turned out to be one of the more difficult overall challenges against Clair. This is mostly because Hidden Power isn't often an option for these Pokemon, which meant we had to rely on a combination of Roost, Return, and a Dream more often than not. Our easiest victories within this type were with Farfetch'd, who used Swords Dance and Return to annihilate her team, and with the Dodrio line, who had a strong enough attack stat to clear her without any major issues. I also didn't have very many issues when it came to the evolved Pokemon Noctowl, Fearow, Pidgeotto, and Pidgeot, as their higher stat pools and, in Noctowl's case, access to Hypnosis were enough to seal the deal with only a few attempts. But as for the little guys Pidgey, Spearow, and Hoothoot, things were a little tougher. Although Hoothoot also has access to Hypnosis, its stats are really not that impressive, and we got pretty damn close to our 20 attempt limit before some good luck and damage rolls saw us get the victory. Pidgey, the weakest of the bunch, turned out to be really difficult, and I was only able to get the win through getting good luck with Swagger and letting Clair's Pokemon deal significant damage to themselves. And the same ended up being true for Spearow, who, despite having the highest attack stat of the three, still needed to rely on Clair and some luck before getting the win around attempt number 10. Still, despite those difficulties, we manage a victory with all of the flying types, and bring our number of victories up to 96. The normal type, as usual, is a bit of a mixed bag, but due to their incredible moveset diversity and the fact that they get stab damage on return, beating Clair with a lot of these Pokemon is very possible. Just by using Return and a status or stat boosting move here and there, we're able to pick up easy wins with the Rattata, Aipom, Snubbull, Lickitung, and Teddiursa lines, along with Furret, Dunsparce, Tauros, Miltank, Eevee, Kangaskhan, and Snorlax. On the special attacking side of this type, we mostly rely on moves like Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, and of course Hidden Power Dragon to secure our victories. And we also solo Clair with Clefairy and Clefable, Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff, and Stantler, on top of the Togepi, Meowth, Porygon, and Chansey lines. Smeargle, as a Pokemon that can learn any move in this series, has no issue taking her Pokemon out with a combination of Thunderbolt and Spirit. And then, we have Ditto. So, Ditto has obviously been a problem for us in the past because it's only as good as the Pokemon it's facing up against. But unlike Bruno, Clair does actually know how to choose team members, and this means we're able to face her with a Gyarados instead of an Onix. Oh, thank God. This was great, and ultimately I did get the win with Ditto, but therein lies the mystery. As you can see by the footage on the screen, I pretty early on got a victory over the opposing Gyarados at level 53, but then when I tried to use Dragon Pulse on her following Dragonair, it did about half damage and she knocked me out. This was pretty disheartening, as I thought it was going to mean that I would be losing with Ditto no matter what, but then I thought about the trick that eventually got us the win against Bruno, namely allowing Ditto to level up while transformed and getting a glitchy stat increase that way. However, when I checked the Bulbapedia page for Transform, I came away with the impression that this only worked in Gen 3 and before, and so I thought even that would be a no-go. But given I already had the Ditto set up in PK Hex, I decided it wouldn't hurt to just give it a go, and went in against her with a timid-natured Ditto just under level 53, boasting max EVs in speed and special attack. And then, when I finally got a run where I beat her Gyarados with this Ditto, Dragon Pulse hit for much more than half damage, and I swept through the rest of her team no problem. So was it the level up that got me this win, or was it something else? If any of you would be able to tell me, I would love to hear it, but for now, I'm happy to just take the win and move on. As for the few Pokemon that couldn't do it within 20 attempts, there were, of course, the little guys. Although Igglypuff and Cleffa both have pretty decent movesets and access to the move Sing, They are incredibly weak, and 20 attempts just wasn't enough for me to get the job done. I think if I had another 10 or 20 attempts, these two definitely would have been doable, but unfortunately it just didn't happen. And as for Sentret, I tried two different loadouts focusing on return and rollout respectively, and given neither of them worked, we ended up with 3 no-goes in the normal type and a new score of 128 out of 256. The electric type was pretty simple for this challenge, as every member of the type is blessed with an impressive special attack stat and guaranteed coverage on her opening Gyarados. And although there were some little dudes such as Pichu and Elekid who could have proven difficult, we cleared through the entire type without too many attempts, and quickly raised our overall score to 143. And just like that, we're over halfway done. The bug type is one that's always a little hit or miss, with Pokemon like Scizor and Heracross rubbing shoulders with the likes of Weedle and Metapod. But there are a few surefire strategies we're able to use within this type to make it an overall success. First off, there are a lot of bug Pokemon that can learn Swords Dance, which, in a challenge like this, is practically an instant win button. And we're able to pick up victories with the Ledyba and Paris lines, and with Beedrill, Scyther, Pinsir, and Heracross. Our second line of offense is with the bugs that have sleep-inducing moves, which make it so that Clair can't really do anything as we run a train over her team with the Yanma and Venonat lines, and with Butterfree. The last few Pokemon we pick up wins with here are Spinarak and Ariados, who use their high physical attack to clear her out with Return, Fortress, who uses his high defense, Toxic, and Protect to guarantee a win, and Shuckle. Shuckle was interesting in that I thought it would be way easier than it actually was. After all, it has incredibly high defenses, even at level 53. But Clair's Gyarados has the move Dragon Rage, which does a set 40 damage each turn. And because Shuckle doesn't have the greatest attack stat, we ended up taking enough damage to her opening Pokemon that it wasn't a sure thing we would survive against her other 3. Although we did get the win eventually with some solid luck, this was one I could have easily seen us losing. And speaking of losing, let's talk about the bugs that didn't make the cut. In my last 2 videos, the weaker bug types usually warranted a pretty lengthy discussion on my strategy and method for beating the opposing team, but now that isn't really necessary. Although I still gave it a go with these bug Pokemon, with our new level cap of 53, the weaker insects didn't really have much of a chance, and we weren't able to get victories with Caterpie, Metapod, Weedle, or Kakuna. Those losses were expected, but the fact that I also couldn't get a win with Pineco was a little surprising to me. He has decent defenses, but the lack of the steel type really hurt him, and although I could maybe see a world where some lucky crits got him the win, that didn't happen to us. And when all was said and done with the bug type, our total sat at 161 out of 256. And now we move on to my favorite type, Grock. Going into these types, I assumed we would be facing down a lot of losses and a drop in our final percentage, but actually I only ended up losing with one Pokemon, Diglett. Diglett is pretty fast, but it doesn't really have anything else going for it, and with such a subpar moveset, I just wasn't able to find a way to make it work. But I did find a way to make it work for all of the other rock and ground types, so let's take a look at how I did it. Outside of Dugtrio, who was able to beat Clair with Swagger in return, and the Phanpy line, which relied on rollout and a little bit of luck to finish her off, every other ground type was able to learn Swords Dance, which pretty much guaranteed their victory. So we also picked up some quick wins with the Sandshrew, Cubone, and Rhyhorn lines, as well as with Gligar. On the rock side of things, however, our strategies were a little more varied. The Larvitar line handled everything easily with Dragon Dance and Outrage. The 4 fossil Pokemon used a combination of Ancient Power and Ice Beam to get the job done. Sudowoodo had Thunder Punch and Ice Punch for super effective damage, and Aerodactyl was an easy sweep with Thunder Fang and Dragon Claw. Our hardest challenges against Clair in this type were, as I'm sure you would expect, Geodude and Bruno's favorite Onix. The main issue is that these Pokemon are incredibly slow and have a 4 times weakness to water, which meant that the moment the Kingdra came out, we were basically sunk. It's a great stroke of fortune then that Clair also thinks Gyarados should have been a Dragon type, and therefore never gave it a water move. This meant that, while the Gyarados launched Dragon Rages at us, we were able to hit Rock Polish to raise our speed, and guarantee that we would get a hit on the Kingdra before it could kill us. Doing this, I was able to use
Rock Slide and Earthquake
to great effect with Onix and knock her Pokemon into the next world. And with Geodude and his evolutions, all it took was a Thunder Punch on the Gyarados, and a strong Earthquake to close it out on her remaining team members. So, the Grock type ended up being a much bigger success than I anticipated, and we came out on the other side with our total number of victories at 185. The Poison type isn't exactly the most explosive of all types, well, except for Weezing, but I was able to make a pretty good showing of it. Luckily, most of these Pokemon have a decent special attack stat and access to an electric move, and using that combination, I was able to net some quick victories with the Nidoran, Coughing, and Grimer lines. After that, I also picked up a victory with Arbok using Swagger and Hidden Power, and with Golbat and Crobat through the power of Hypnosis. For the first forms of those two lines, however, it wasn't in the cards. Although Zubat does have Hypnosis, which I was hoping would be enough for us, my luck never turned out, and we hit 20 attempts without me seeing a win. As for Ekans, I tried really hard to get Stockpile, Swagger, and Hidden Power to carry us to victory, but it was no good. And so we finished off the Poison type with our total at 198. Next, I'd like to talk about the 4 rarest types in the Johto region: Ghost, Steel, Dark, and Dragon. Because each of these types is incredibly powerful on its own, and there are so few Pokemon among them, I thought it would be best to just tackle all of these together. For the Ghost type, things were pretty simple. The Ghastly line used a combination of Hypnosis and Shadow Ball to sweep through her team with minimal attempts, and for Misdreavus, given it can use Calm Mind, Hidden Power Dragon was all we needed to see a victory. With its resistance to Dragon-type damage, the Steel type was similarly simple, and we got the win with Steelix via Thunderfang and Earthquake, while Skarmory relied on the classic combination of Swords Dance and Return to get its victory. The Dark type as a whole usually has some pretty good non-damaging moves within its ranks, and we were able to utilize that to our advantage here. Umbreon, with its immense defense stats, was able to tank damage while hitting Hidden Power to secure the win, while Murkrow and the Houndour line buffed up their special attack via Calm Mind and Nasty Plot before blasting Clair into oblivion. From there, all that was left was Sneasel, who, thanks to this being Gen 4, was finally able to take advantage of its meaty attack stat and cruise its way to victory with Ice Punch. Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite are the only Pokemon in this game with the primary Dragon type, and so they're all we have left to finish off these 4 types. Dratini may have been difficult at a different level cap, but as it was able to learn Dragon Dance before level 50 in this generation, all it took was buffing up our offense and sweeping through her Pokemon with Dragon Rush. With these 4 types finished without any losses, our total rises up to 212 out of 256, and we move on to the Fighting type. Most of these Pokemon are pretty strong offensively, and even more importantly, they can all learn the move Bulk Up. This is a great move for a challenge like this because it boosts both their offense and defense by 1 stage, and by using it in combination with Thunder Punch and a strong offensive move, we're able to clear through her team easily with the Mankey and Machop lines, as well as with the 3 Hitmons. Our only challenge for this type comes with Tyrogue, a little guy who has a decent moveset and a lot of fighting spirit, but not a lot of power to back it up. Even though I tried bulking up and using Swagger, within my 20 attempts he just kept taking too much damage and was never able to close it out against Clair, resulting in our only loss for this type. Still, even with that loss, we were able to finish the Fighting type and bring our score up to 220. Our penultimate type for this challenge is going to be the Psychic type, which doesn't warrant an incredibly long discussion. This type is easily one of the best types in the series, and all of its members have incredibly strong special attack-based movesets that let them handle almost any fight with ease. A ton of these Pokemon are also able to learn Calm Mind, which was really just the icing on top of an already very strong cake, and made this type almost trivial. So before long we picked up our wins with the Drowsy, Abra, and Natu lines, and with Wobbuffet, Girafarig, Mr. Mime, Espeon, Lugia, Mew and Mewtwo, and Celebi. But despite this type's incredible strength and diversity in movesets, there is one Pokemon that makes up for it in the opposite direction. Let's give a warm welcome to Unknown, one of the weirdest Pokemon in the entire series. Unknown can only learn one move, Hidden Power, and although I feel like I spent this entire video talking about how good that move is, you kind of have to be able to take advantage of it for it to be that strong, and Unknown with its weak defenses really isn't able to. Although it can hit decently hard, it can't take a hit in return, and throughout all of my early attempts with Hidden Power Dragon, I wasn't able to get the win with this guy. But you can stop writing your angry comments now. Although I did lose with Unknown in my first run through for this challenge, while I was writing this script, I realized that I have really learned nothing at all since the Bruno video, because why didn't I just use the choice specs? Like, Unknown literally only learns one move and is the perfect candidate for that item. And so, with just a little bit of shame for how bad I am at these games, I went back in with the choice specs and a max damage hidden power dragon equipped to my Unknown, and I got the victory on my first try. Hey, at least I realized it, right? And with that, we've already made it to our final type, Ice. Ice, obviously, is strong against Dragon, but that doesn't mean that we were able to sweep through it with no thought whatsoever. In this instance, her Gyarados and Kingdra both being Water type actually plays to her advantage, and we have to do a little thinking here and there to get our wins. With Smoochum and Jinx, who learn Calm Mind, Ice Beam and Hidden Power Dragon are more than enough to get us a victory, and Articuno is a legendary, so that one is no big deal. Delibird only really has Ice Beam to work with, but with him we actually got a lucky freeze on the Kingdra, and we're able to slide to a victory with that. And then there was the Swinub line. Although I knew that Pylo and Mamoswine would have no issue with this fight, Swinub is a, you guessed it, little guy, and looked like it was going to have some trouble making it through the fight. I knew that, to get a win with this Pokemon, I would have to rely on some luck. Against the Gyarados, I was using Ancient Power for its super effective damage, but this move has another property that made it the obvious call for this fight. Each time we used Ancient Power, we also had a 10% chance of getting an Omni boost, with all of our stats rising by one stage. Although we only had 20 attempts to get the win before we would have to call it quits, statistically that wasn't a huge stretch, and eventually we did get the Omni boost and propelled our tiny friend to even greater heights of power. With our stats increased, we took out the Gyarados, and Clair brought in her Kingdra. With our health already so low, I was really worried, and as it turned out, I had a reason to be, because after the Kingdra survived our first Ice Beam, it hit us with a Dragon Pulse that we had absolutely no earthly reason to survive, and so I still view it as an act of God that our Swinub held on with a single HP. But hold on, it did. And with our second lease on life, we were able to feint the Kingdra and both of her Dragonairs to secure our final win against Clair and her team, and bring our final score to 243 out of 256 Pokemon cleared. Converting that into a Bruno quotient, we end up with 94.9. If Clair was such a sore loser just being beat by a single team in the main game, I can't imagine how she'll react when she finds out that about 95% of the cast can solo her team at level 53. This is a really good score, and to be honest with everyone, I'm kind of surprised I was able to get the win with so many Pokemon. Obviously, allowing all TMs and using Hidden Power did help quite a bit, but I'm happy with how the challenge went, and the varied movesets and approaches that I had to use to get this score. And although I know that my runs against Sydney and Bruno are a little outdated due to the updated rule set, if we were to position Clair on the BQ scale, she would currently sit on the top as the most difficult trainer we've had to fight. But for how long will that remain true? I think it's going to depend on who we fight next, which is why I wanted to turn to you to help me decide that. In the comments of the last videos, one of the more requested opponents for this challenge was Whitney, an infamous gym leader that I'm sure we all know. But I'm also interested in fighting against one of the tougher trainers in my favorite games of Fire Red and Leaf Green, so I'm also going to put up Blue as an option. For the next BQ video, I'm going to be fighting whoever is the more requested between these two trainers, so be sure to let me know. Also, if you pick Blue, I would appreciate it if you can include which starter you think he should have when I fight him. And now that that's been said, I think it's time for our standard rules discussion, so be sure to stick around if you'd like to impact the future of this series and how we go about it. There were a few shakeups this time around, but the primary change I wanted to address was the new level cap system. Although I'm generally satisfied with this level cap and would be interested in continuing to use it for this challenge and seeing how it performs long term, what did you all think? Was 53 a fair level to be fighting Clair at? And would you be okay seeing me use the same modifier based off of team size in the future? I know that we might need more data before we can make a final decision, but let me know your thoughts so far. Otherwise, the main point I wanted to bring up in this rules discussion was in regards to allowed moves. Based on a lot of comments saying it would be okay to use Hidden Power if the level cap were lowered, I decided to test that out in this video, and it turned out to be a major boon in getting us as many victories as I was able to. So I wanted to ask what you thought about that. Did loading more than half of my Pokemon with Hidden Power Dragon seem fair, or was it a little much? Also, for this challenge, I decided to allow myself to use any TMs, regardless of when you acquire them in the game, and also allowed all breedable moves on my Pokemon, even if they came from a line that can only exist with the national dex. My reasoning for this was that, at the end of the day, this challenge exists to test how strong a trainer is in theory, and allowing a Pokemon to have access to all of the tools in its arsenal felt like the best way to do that. After all, with trading, any of these sets technically could be possible in a vanilla game, so I generally feel okay using TMs, even if it leads to some strange situations like a level 20 Charmander knowing Flamethrower, for example. But because this will become more of a factor in future lower level challenges, I wanted to get ahead of it and see what you all thought about that now, so let me know. Finally, I also wanted to get a little bit of feedback on my 20 attempt limit that I attempted in this video. I generally agreed with those commenters that stated infinite attempts went against the spirit of the challenge, and kind of arbitrarily decided on a limit of 20 because it seemed good enough. So if there are no objections to that, I'll continue on with it in future videos, but if you have a better number and a reason, you can always let me know. And I think that's it for the rules discussion, which means it's time for me to make my exit. I just want to thank you all very much for watching, especially if you made it to the end of this video, and I hope you'll look forward to the next one. I know it took a while for me to get this BQ video out, and I can't guarantee an exact time frame on the next one, so if you're interested in seeing it, I would really recommend you subscribe. And if you do that, you'll also be able to catch our other videos, such as Nuzlocke runs, discussions, and ROM hack playthroughs. So what are you waiting for? Come on in. But that's going to be it for me. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and remember, stay phenomenal.